Have you ever been told to sit in a corner and just watch? Like you're invisible? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. And it changed everything. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I thought I knew what workplace humiliation felt like. I was wrong. Nothing prepared me for what happened on that cold Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago, when my boss Marcus Caldwell looked me dead in the eye and said those words that would haunt me for weeks. The conference room at Henderson & Associates smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams. I'd been working there for 3 years as a marketing coordinator, always hoping for that promotion that seemed to dance just out of reach. The mahogany table reflected the gray November sky through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and I could hear the distant hum of traffic on Michigan Avenue below. "Sarah, we're having the quarterly strategy meeting today," Marcus announced, barely looking up from his laptop. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit pressed to perfection. Everything about him screamed authority, from his firm handshake to his corner office view. "You'll be joining us." My heart skipped a beat. Finally, I thought. After months of being excluded from these high-level discussions, I was being invited to the table. I'd prepared for this moment, staying late countless nights, researching market trends, crafting presentations that never saw the light of day. "That's wonderful, Marcus. I've actually prepared some insights on our Q4 campaign strategies that I think could really..." He held up his hand, and my words died in my throat. The gesture was so casual, so dismissive, that it felt like a slap across the face. "Let me be clear, Sarah. You're there to observe, not speak. We need someone to take notes. And frankly, you know our processes better than anyone." The words hit me like ice water. Observe, not speak. I felt my cheeks burn with embarrassment as the other employees in the open office area pretended not to hear. Jennifer from accounting glanced up sympathetically before quickly looking away. Even Tom, the intern who'd started just 2 months ago, seemed uncomfortable. I understand," I managed to say, though every fiber of my being wanted to scream. 3 years of dedication, of arriving early and leaving late, of watching less qualified people get promoted around me, and this was my reward? To be a silent secretary in my own expertise area? Marcus was already back to his laptop, dismissing me with his indifference. "Meeting starts at 2. Don't be late." I walked back to my cubicle on shaky legs, my mind reeling. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher now, the gray carpet more worn. My small workspace, decorated with a single succulent plant and a photo of my golden retriever Max, suddenly felt like a prison cell. As I sat down, I caught my reflection in my computer screen. 32 years old, master's degree in marketing, and I was being treated like an intern. My brown hair was pulled back in what I'd hoped was a professional bun, my navy blazer carefully chosen to project competence. But what did any of it matter if I was just there to be seen and not heard? The hours crawled by until 2 o'clock. I gathered my notepad and pen, took a deep breath, and walked into that conference room where my career would take an unexpected turn. You know that feeling when you're sitting in a room full of people, but you might as well be invisible. That's exactly where I found myself, and what happened next would make me question everything I thought I knew about my worth. The conference room filled with the senior team. Marcus at the head of the table, his deputy Rachel Sterling to his right, VP of Sales Derek Hammond across from her, and 3 other department heads. Then there was me, relegated to a small chair in the corner with my notepad, like a child allowed to sit with the adults. "Before we begin," Marcus announced, his voice carrying that authoritative tone I'd grown to resent, "I want to remind everyone that Sarah is here purely as an observer. She'll be taking notes for the record, but she won't be participating in the discussion." Rachel nodded approvingly, though I caught something in her expression that looked almost apologetic. She'd always been kinder to me than the others, sometimes asking about Max or complimenting my work, but not today. Today, she was part of the machine that was grinding me down. Derek leaned back in his leather chair, completely ignoring my presence. He'd joined the company 6 months after me, but had been promoted twice. His expensive watch caught the light as he gestured toward the presentation screen. The meeting began with Marcus outlining their Q4 strategy. As I scribbled notes, I realized they were discussing the exact campaign I'd proposed 3 months ago. The same target demographics, the same social media approach, even the same tagline I'd brainstormed during those late nights when the office was empty except for me and the cleaning crew. "I think this approach really captures our brand essence," Rachel was saying, pointing to a slide that contained my exact words, my exact research, my exact creative vision. I gripped my pen so tightly I thought it might break. The irony was suffocating. Here I was, forced to silently document them discussing my own ideas as if they were their brilliant innovations. Derek chimed in. The demographic analysis is particularly sharp. Whoever pulled this together really understands our market. Marcus smiled proudly. That's what happens when you have a strong leadership team. Great minds think alike. Great minds think alike. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Those weren't their great minds at work. That was my mind, my research, my countless hours of analysis that I'd submitted in reports they'd barely acknowledged. The discussion continued for an hour. They debated budget allocations, timeline adjustments, resource management. Every time they hit a snag, I knew the answer. Every time they seemed confused about implementation details, I had the solution. But I sat there, silent, invisible, reduced to a human recording device. At one point, Derek raised a concern about the campaign's digital strategy. I'm not sure we have the right platform mix. This seems aggressive for our typical audience. I nearly choked. I had specifically researched their concerns about platform selection and had data that would address exactly what he was worried about. The information was sitting in my laptop, just 20 feet away in my cubicle. But I couldn't speak. I could only watch as they spent 15 minutes debating something I could resolve in 2. Rachel glanced at me then, and for a moment, I thought she might ask for my input. Our eyes met across the room, and I saw something flicker in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or guilt. But the moment passed, and she turned back to the discussion without a word. As the meeting wound down, Marcus stood up, straightening his tie with satisfaction. Excellent work, everyone. I think we have a solid strategy moving forward. Solid strategy. My strategy. My work. My sleepless nights and weekend research, now being celebrated as their collective brilliance, while I sat in the corner like a decorative plant. Sarah, make sure those notes are typed up and distributed by end of day, Marcus said, finally acknowledging my existence. Of course, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. As everyone filed out, chatting about dinner plans and weekend getaways, I remained seated, staring at my notepad filled with documentation of my own intellectual theft. The conference room felt colder now, the gray sky outside matching the storm brewing in my chest. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Max curled up beside me, and I made a decision that would change everything. Have you ever reached that moment where you realize you've been slowly disappearing, piece by piece, until there's almost nothing left of who you used to be? That's exactly where I found myself, and what I discovered next made me understand that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is absolutely nothing at all. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Marcus's dismissive gesture, heard Derek crediting strong leadership for my ideas, felt the crushing weight of my own silence. Max sensed my restlessness, occasionally lifting his golden head to check on me before settling back down with a concerned whimper. The next morning, Chicago was wrapped in a thick fog that seemed to mirror the haze in my mind. I arrived at the office early, as usual, hoping to find some clarity in the familiar routine. But as I walked past the conference room where yesterday's humiliation had taken place, I felt something crack inside my chest. I spent the morning typing up those meeting notes, each word a small act of self-betrayal. I documented their enthusiasm for innovative strategies and forward-thinking approaches, carefully omitting the fact that every innovative thought had originated from my own mind months earlier. Around 10 o'clock, Jennifer from accounting stopped by my cubicle. Her usually cheerful demeanor seemed subdued, and she kept glancing around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Sarah, can I talk to you for a minute?" she whispered, perching on the edge of my desk. I nodded, grateful for any human connection that didn't involve being treated like office furniture. "What happened yesterday?" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "That wasn't right. Everyone knows those ideas came from your reports. I've seen you working on that campaign concept for months." Her validation hit me harder than I expected. I'd begun to question my own memory, wondering if maybe I was being overly sensitive, if maybe this was just how corporate life worked. But Jennifer's words confirmed what I already knew deep down. I don't know what to do, Jen. I feel like I'm disappearing here, one meeting at a time. She squeezed my shoulder gently. You're worth more than this, Sarah. You know that, right? Before I could respond, Marcus's voice boomed across the office. Team meeting in 5 minutes. Conference room B. My stomach dropped. Another meeting. Another opportunity to be relegated to the corner. To be seen but not heard. To watch my contributions be absorbed into the collective leadership genius. But as I walked toward that conference room, something felt different. Maybe it was Jennifer's words, or maybe it was the accumulation of 3 years of small indignities finally reaching critical mass. Whatever it was, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. The meeting was about implementation of our Q4 strategy. Marcus was in his element, pacing in front of the whiteboard, gesturing grandly as he outlined the plan. My plan. Again. Now, the timeline is aggressive, he was saying, but I'm confident this team can execute at the highest level. Derek nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely. Though I do have some concerns about the digital platform strategy. It feels like we might be overreaching. And there it was again. The same concern he'd raised yesterday. The same issue I could resolve in minutes if anyone cared to listen. But instead of frustration, I felt something else. Clarity. I watched them go in circles for 20 minutes, debating solutions I'd already researched and documented. I watched Marcus grow increasingly agitated as the timeline became more complicated. I watched Rachel shift uncomfortably as Derek's concerns grew more pronounced. This is more complex than we initially thought, Marcus finally admitted, running his hand through his silver hair. We might need to bring in an outside consultant to help with the digital strategy component. An outside consultant. They were willing to pay thousands of dollars to a stranger rather than listen to the person who'd created the strategy in the first place. The person sitting right there in the corner, invisible in plain sight. That's when I realized something profound. My silence wasn't just compliance anymore. It was power. I sat there, watching them struggle with problems I could solve. And I understood that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is exactly what they expect you to do. Nothing. So I waited. I watched. I observed, just as I'd been instructed. And I planned. They say timing is everything. And after sitting in silence for weeks, watching grown adults struggle with problems I could solve in my sleep, I finally understood that sometimes the most powerful word you can say is goodbye. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of watching Marcus and his team fumble through implementation of my strategy, hiring expensive consultants to solve problems I'd already anticipated and solved in my original proposals. 2 weeks of Derek's growing panic as his digital platform concerns proved prophetic. 2 weeks of Rachel shooting me increasingly uncomfortable glances during meetings where I remained perfectly, powerfully silent. The outside consultant, Dr. Patricia Wong, was everything I wasn't in this company's eyes. Older, more expensive, and externally validated. She commanded respect simply by being an outsider, while I commanded nothing, despite being the person who understood this project better than anyone in the room. During her presentation on digital strategy optimization, she recommended almost exactly what I'd proposed months earlier. The irony would have been hilarious if it weren't so heartbreaking. Your current approach has potential, Dr. Wong explained, her laser pointer dancing across charts that looked remarkably similar to ones I'd created. But there are several platform integration issues that need immediate attention. Marcus nodded gravely, as if receiving profound wisdom. What would you recommend? As Dr. Wong outlined her solutions, I discreetly pulled out my phone and opened the folder where I'd stored my original campaign proposal. Point by point, her recommendations matched my research. Even her timeline suggestions were identical to what I'd submitted. That's when I realized this wasn't just about being heard anymore. This wasn't about getting credit or recognition. This was about dignity. This was about remembering who I was before this place convinced me I was invisible. During my lunch break, I walked to Grant Park, despite the bitter December wind cutting through my coat. Lake Michigan stretched endlessly gray before me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I sat on a bench, pulled out my phone, and started typing. The resignation letter wrote itself. 3 years of frustration, disappointment, and diminished self-worth poured onto the screen in clear professional language. But it wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was something more powerful. It was honest. I returned to the office with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. The afternoon meeting was already in progress when I slipped into my usual corner chair. Dr. Wong was presenting her final recommendations, and the team was hanging on her every word. Implementation will require someone with deep institutional knowledge, she was saying. Someone who understands not just the strategy, but the cultural nuances of your brand and audience. Marcus frowned. We were hoping you could handle the implementation as well. I'm afraid my consulting rate for long-term implementation would be substantial. You'd be better served by someone internal who has the time to fully dedicate to this project. The room fell silent. Everyone suddenly realized what I'd known all along. Strategy is one thing, but execution requires someone who lives and breathes the brand every day. Someone who'd been preparing for exactly this opportunity for 3 years. Derek cleared his throat nervously. Do we have someone internally who could... All eyes slowly turned to me. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't invisible. Marcus, Rachel, Derek, even Dr. Wong were looking at me with something approaching recognition. Sarah, Marcus said carefully, you've been documenting all of these discussions. Do you think you could take on the implementation role? The moment stretched between us like a bridge I could choose to cross or burn. They needed me. Finally, desperately, they needed me. And now I had something I'd never had before. Leverage. I stood up slowly, smoothing my skirt, and walked to the center of the room. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out an envelope. Marcus, I said, my voice steady and clear. I've been observing for weeks now, just as you instructed. And I've observed something very important. I placed the envelope on the table in front of him. I've observed that my value to this company has been consistently underestimated. I've observed my ideas being credited to others, and I've observed that it took hiring an expensive consultant to recognize expertise that was sitting in the corner all along. Marcus opened the envelope, his face growing pale as he read. This is my 2 weeks' notice, I continued. I've accepted a position as marketing director at Thompson & Associates. They were very interested in my campaign strategies, particularly the Q4 digital platform integration approach that I developed here. The silence in the room was deafening. Rachel's mouth was slightly open. Derek was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Dr. Wong had a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Sarah, let's discuss this, Marcus said, his authoritative tone cracking slightly. I'm sure we can work something out. I'm sure you can, I replied. Dr. Wong, your consulting rate for long-term implementation? $12,000 a month, plus expenses. I nodded and turned back to Marcus. Thompson offered me $90,000 annually, plus full creative control over their digital marketing strategy. They seem to value voices that speak as much as they appreciate ones that observe. I gathered my notepad and pen, tools that had documented my own diminishment for months, and walked toward the door. Oh, and Marcus? I paused at the threshold. You were right about one thing. I am an excellent observer. I observed that respect isn't given here. It's taken. So I'm taking mine with me. As I walked back to my cubicle to pack my few personal belongings, I could hear urgent whispers erupting behind me. Max's photo smiled at me from my desk, and I smiled back. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is exactly what they tell you to do, until the moment you decide not to. 2 weeks later, I started my new job with a corner office, a team that actually listened when I spoke, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that somewhere across town, Marcus was probably still trying to implement my strategy without me. The best part? They're still trying to hire that expensive consultant. But some voices, once they've remembered their worth, can never be silenced again.